The musical inspirations for the Captain Matchbox Whoopee Band, I guess, go back decades and decades. Growing up, was it these sounds that attracted you more so than rock and roll, which I guess would have been at the right time for you growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up loving kind of the 20s and 30s and collecting old 78 records, including, believe it or not, My Canary Has Circles Under His Eyes. But it wasn't really until I was about 16 or 17 that I discovered blues and jug band music. I was given a tape of this stuff, and I thought, gee, this is great. And we'd already, with Jim, my brother, at school, we'd already done a kind of a send-up of a play, kind of, avant-garde play, and that was a complete failure because everyone took it seriously. So we decided to do music instead and take the mickey out of the rock and roll business, and we thought, because we thought it was really funny, all the puncing around rock stars, but we end up being on the rock scene, so the joke was on us.
Yeah. How accessible were those old 78s to you growing up? Were they hard to track down?
Well, my grandparents were in vaudeville, and my parents had a love of kind of sort of comic old music from that time. So that was a big influence, and particular Fats Waller, and the early recordings of Matchbox were really into Fats Waller in a lot of ways. But also, Jim and I used to go to fetes in the early days when we were like 6 or 7 years old, or later, or until about, well, right through our lives really, but till about, until early adulthood anyway. We were going to sort of, school fetes and op shops and buying old 78s that had funny titles on the record. We didn't even know what that was on them until we played them, And so it was easy to get that kind of stuff. And then in the late 60s in Melbourne, there was a lot of shops, well, not a lot, but a few shops that had blues and old popular music and things like that are reissued on vinyl, So it made it a lot easier.
Just prior to Captain Matchbox, what were some of your band involvements there?
Well, Captain Matchbox really was the first one. We had at school, the band formed as the Jelly Bean Jug Band at the Camberwell High School in Melbourne, and at the gymnasium, just as a piss take of the rock scene, and we. Well, that's about it. I mean, really, basically that was the band, except that we kind of changed personnel because people were just mucking around with it. Nobody was really seriously with it. Even Jim and I weren't all that serious about it, but it kept on growing on us. So, so it was the Jelly Bean Jug Band, and then I think we changed the name of the band in one of the, we went on New Faces.
Right.
And we'd already won one heat, and then when we went in the finals, we decided to call ourselves something else, which we decided to get for the Captain Matchbox Whoopee Band instead of the Jelly Bean Jug Band, because we thought jug bands, people didn't understand what it was, and they thought that it was hillbilly music with straws coming out of your mouth and floppy hats, and we didn't want to give that. That's not what we were about, Yeah. So we changed the name to the Captain Matchbox Whoopee Band, and yeah.
Any of the bios and the bios of the band that I've read over the years cite the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band as a comparison.
Oh, well, yeah. The funny thing about that band was, we loved them, but we didn't actually know they existed, and they'd actually existed until 1975 or 4. I can't remember. I was in Perth, and someone played me it. I'd never heard them before, and I thought they were fantastic, and they were going down the same path as us in lots of ways. I mean, they had basically rehashed old 20s and 30s dance band numbers into their own, as well as writing their own material. So they'd mixed it up, just like we were doing, and they took a kind of very satirical edge, which is also what we were doing. So it was an absolute. I don't know, revelation when we heard this band, and I've loved them ever since. But they weren't an influence at all in the early days, even though they could have been.
Yeah.
Because we actually never heard of them.
the comparisons sit okay with you? You're happy with that?
Oh yeah. I love them. I mean, I'm honoured to be in the same area. I thought they were fantastic, and in fact, in my kids' career later on, Jollity Farm, which is an old Leslie Saroni musical number anyway, done by, and also Jack Hilton Orchestra did it in the 20s and 30s. I can't remember which one, probably 30s, 1930s. Jollity Farm was a hit not a hit, but it was one of their tracks anyway on Bonzos, and it was also a major number for me on my kids' albums. So I have a great affinity for the Bonzos. I love them.
Now, you mentioned before there was quite a few personnel changes in the band through the years. Was it difficult for you to find musicians that were sympathetic to the type of music you wanted to make?
Kind of, yeah. We did have changes all the time because we never made any money, so people got really frustrated with it. I mean, they loved it and they thought it was funny and they enjoyed the band was successful even though it wasn't financially successful. It got lots of coverage and people, were really into it for kind of oddball reasons. And musicians, acoustic musicians, got into it too, who were very good, and they kind of found themselves, and any good ones seem to find themselves in the Matchbox band. But it was hard keeping members, and we had a core. I mean, basically, Jim and I ended up being the only real core there. But there was always a core thing, and then people would leave, and then they'd want to come back again, so they'd come back later on, and it was kind of constantly coming and going. But we were all also in the early days, for the first two albums, we were art students, so we were trying to survive. We couldn't survive off the money that we were making, so we could have being art teachers or film students or whatever. And so people were just coming and going all the time. I mean, when they played, for instance, when Wangaratta Wahine got high rotation on 3XY or something, which broke the record and made it big hit all right around Australia, I was actually listening to it while I was cleaning up a factory in Hawthorne, trying to make a quid. It was really bizarre.
You were a very popular attraction on the Melbourne live scene, and it was a great time for live music in Melbourne. Any standout memories of the scene then? It's hard to. I mean, there's so many different things that in those days that were really exciting. I mean, the Melbourne Artists Workshop, which was a kind of collective of visual artists as well as musicians and circus performers and writers and things like that, which then opposed the kind of commercial rock scene, and it didn't really oppose it, but sort of, it was another aspect anyway, to artists taking responsibility for themselves. That was for me was a real highlight, because it kind of meant, we hoped it would make a change, and even though it had no funding whatsoever, it lasted for, probably 2 years, which isn't a long time, but with no funding, putting on massive concerts, and then was copied after that by, other things like Griffith Cabarets and things like that in the same venue. They just basically followed on the same kind of thing that we'd been doing. So they were that was kind of it was a long highlight. It was like a 2-year highlight for me, doing that kind of stuff. I really enjoyed that, and playing some of the big concerts that we did were fantastic. Was there ever much in the way of overseas interest in the band?
Yeah, well, the band, there's a few things that happened, but the band really broke up in 75 when it was had been booked to work West Coast of America and also the East Coast, both nightclubs and working with John Lee Hooker. And actually we had 9 weeks of touring. 6 weeks out of that was with John Lee Hooker, and he had a stroke just a week before we left. We had everything set, and without we couldn't do it. Once he had the stroke, we couldn't tour with him. All those dates were cancelled. It was uneconomic. We couldn't go, and that basically the band dissolved then. And then I went and joined a Pram Factory, APG Theatre, which was also another major, sort of step for us and me in particular. And that became Circus Oz, but we had Soapbox Circus, and that was also forming the first sort of political what do you call, I don't know, theatre circus in Australia and probably the world. I mean, at that stage there was not much going on in that area, and we actually, did forge a lot of frontiers at that stage, which was very exciting. It was all very exciting times, wild as hell, and we were smoking lots of pot and having great times. We were living a high life there, but not making any money basically.
Did the commercial notoriety that the band eventually received surprise you, considering the non-commercial nature of the music?
We never. I only had one ambition when I first started thinking seriously about the band, was to record an album, and so I think we ended up recording about 6 or 7. I can't remember exactly how many we recorded, and then lots of other compilations, but you can't really count those. And so. It was the success we got in getting airplay on rock stations when we weren't even vaguely a rock band was really surprised me. I really didn't think that people would go with it. I mean, My Canary was just a shot out of the blue. We didn't expect that to go anywhere, and it did. And then also Wangaratta Wahine was a shock too, because in fact we released 2 singles off the album. That wasn't an album. That wasn't a single at all. But it ended up being played like an album. So being played like a single. I mean, sorry. So it was quite a surprise to us that the people even like this stuff. I mean, I loved it. We had great time doing it and all that sort of stuff. But we were surprised other people did, because we were certainly not part of any particular movement. I mean, we were really working against the trend, really. We were actually taking the mickey out of, what we thought was the fashion in industry, in the music industry.
What about incorporating original material into the band's recordings? There wasn't really an overabundance of that. Did you not feel the need to do that? That's a hard one, because we do a lot more of that now, but in those days, no, we were very much locked in the 20s and 30s. I did write some songs, like, for instance, Wangaratta Wahine and things, but the bulk of the material was oldie mouldy 20s and 30s novelty songs. So that was that. It wasn't a driving force. It became much stronger later on. But I always thought it was in those days. I sort of changed a bit now, but I always thought it was a bit pretentious to sort of assume that that my songs were better than or even vaguely as good as or near some of these great pop songs that from the 20s and 30s. I just thought there was it was the golden age of music. So I didn't have that push, because we were expressing ourselves very much through these songs. Although we were saying lots, and making out the shows actually, took a particular bent of our own, and we wrote our own kind of material in that way. But the early days, it was really very much a revival band in lots of ways, in our own particular style of 20s and 30s material. There wasn't much pressure for us to write. I actually kind of regret that now, that we didn't do more of that. But we were kind of more just happy to revive these songs that we thought that no one else had ever heard. Looking back, which of the albums do you feel shows more than others what the band was truly about? I guess it's particular tracks. Thought all our albums were very uneven. In retrospect, I can't listen to them now. I listen to songs I did. The only album I've ever been able to listen to has been the National Junk Band, which is what I'm doing now. I never was able to listen to any, even at the time, the Captain Matchbox records. I couldn't listen to them later on because I loved Nagasaki, what we did with that. And the second album was really great to do. Wangaratta Wahine was kind of very indicative of some of the things we wanted to do, although, my brother virtually threatened to leave the band when I wrote it. He hated it, didn't he?
Hey?
He hated it, I believe.
He hated it, absolutely hated it, but he learned to kind of adjust to it. And in fact, it featured, used him quite significantly. His harmonica parts on that were really significant to making it a success. So it's sort of ironical in that regard that something like that was successful. Hernando's Hideaway, that was, I loved I had a great love of Spike Jones, and that's also from my parents and also my grandparents. So I love Spike Jones. So Hernando's Hideaway was really a tribute to Spike Jones. But from all that, I mean, I have to say that it wasn't the band that I always wanted, and I always wanted Captain Matchbox to be. I never got. I've only got it recently in the last few years with the National Junk Band, where I actually wanted to go down the junk path. I wanted to take the jug band idiom, the jugs and the washboards and things, and the wash tub or teacher's basses and kazoos and things, and put them into a modern context. That's what I was really wanting to do at the time, but I got frustrated along the way. And there was a few rock gods, always a few closet rock gods in the band as well, which sort of wanted to go down the rock path. So it never quite got into the direction I wanted to go. Now I've got a band that's more than happy to go that direction. And I actually, was able to say, look, that's what I want to do, and everyone's gone down that path. So that's been the great, even though it hasn't, it's had plenty of people really enjoy it, but it hasn't got the kind of, the notoriety that Matchbox got.
When Matchbox eventually folded up, did you have an idea straight away what career direction you wanted to take? Or was there a settling period there?
No. I mean, I went virtually straight from, that was 79, and it was after a truck accident, and one guy was killed and two other were injured, and it was a pretty horrific time. It just took the whole mickey out of it, and then we ended up weren't slick business people, so we weren't insured, so we ended up spending another 6 months paying off all the PA and hire companies and the lighting and the tracks and that. So I didn't have I have to say that I never really had a game plan through the entire 10 years of it. We were just writing it and having fun with it. But we never really set out goals, apart from we did have the plan to go to America, and it didn't. The band got reviewed. We got fabulous reviews for the albums overseas, and got released in America and on obscure labels, and I think we actually got reviewed as the most obscure band in the world at one stage from Wii magazine or something, some international version of Wii magazine. So I'd never really had any major ambitions, but things fell into place. They always seemed to it was like an incredible ride, because we did, the early days was the moratorium days, is really what kept it going, the kind of political edge, which people weren't really aware of that much. And then, going into Soapbox Circus and doing all that stuff with the Pram Factory, and doing theatre stuff with Pram. I really loved that, APG, and Circus Oz. So it all had those twists and turns all along the way, and then end up kind of like a quasi kind of rock band which never suited me, I have to say. We didn't really have a kind of a game plan or a direction really that was firm in any way. In the long run, the band was very democratic too, and that's what happened. I mean, in that often I got what I thought was a good idea was, regarded as eccentric or stupid. I usually got outvoted in the long run.
About the National Junk Band, could you just touch on a couple of other projects you're involved with in the 80s? The Hiccups Orchestra?
Yeah.
And was it the Hotsy Totsy Band?
Oh, yeah. Well, at the end of Matchbox, after it dissolved after the truck accident, basically, I went and did a year's season at the Last Laugh, which is no longer, I believe, in Melbourne.
No more.
And did a show called Fairground Snaps, which is a big cast, and that was terrific for me. And during that time, I just had a little sideline band, which was the Hotsy Totsies, which was with Paul Neuendorf, who's in Texacali Rose now, I think, and Dave Hubbard, who was in the original Captain Matchbox and sang My Canary, and Sue Bradley, who's tuba player, actually also worked with us in the National Junk Band. I had it was a sideline, and the Hotsy Totsies we used to do that at Le Joke, and do it as odd jobs and things like that, but it wasn't the main thing, because we're virtually working every night anyway with the Fairground Snaps. And after that, I moved to Sydney, because I had family up in Sydney, and Jim had moved up there already and whatever, and I had And I also thought I wanted to sort of follow a theatre and film career up in Sydney, because I felt typecast as Captain Matchbox in Melbourne. I really felt like I needed to kind of get away from that and get into the theatre thing and be Mick Conway or whatever. So that was part of the reason. There was all kinds of reasons for going, but so I went to Sydney and did lots of film work and theatre work and things like that. And that was great for me, but actually the cabaret and film scene wasn't as, ended up not being as great in Sydney as I'd thought it would be. But in the meantime, Jim and I put together Conway Brothers Hiccups. Well, we're just going to call it the Hiccups, but Conway Brothers got stuck on the front, just like, some commercial reason or something. And that was really great, because that was with George Washing Machine and Ian Date, who are fabulous musicians, and Dave Clayton and various people who are incredibly hot musicians. And we actually did a lot of sort of more novelty, but it went into a jazz kind of direction, which didn't quite suit me, but suited everyone else, so I just went with it. But it went, we toured overseas with that. We went to Britain and America with that, and even though we didn't have any support and things, it went really well. We've got fabulous reviews and lots of work, and people loved it. We just didn't have the follow-up. We didn't have the kind of product there with us, which was the disappointing part about that. And we had some incredible adventures with the Hiccups, and that went for a few years as well, until George and Ian decided to go out on their own, and Jim was also getting MS at that stage, so he also, about the end of the 80s, or 88 or 89, somewhere in there, he went off with the Backsliders as originally as kind of as a temporary thing, and ended up doing it quite permanently, and he's been doing that ever since.
Let's go to the present day, the National Junk Band. You mentioned, but you'd been sitting on the concept for a while. Any particular reason why you held off actually putting it into practice?
Well, at the end of the 80s, I really didn't want to have a band, and I had a kind of I like the Hotsy Totsies. I just had a part-time band when people wanted a band occasionally with me in it. I used another little band, but it wasn't really a thing that I wanted to do, and I was actually doing solo work and doing lots of stuff with ABC for kids, and doing lots of kids shows and solo shows, and working in schools a lot, and I'm still doing that now, and doing theatre stuff as well, and all of that was really exciting for me, and I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot of skills in that, doing that, and I didn't really have any plans to have a band, but I knew there was a guy up here who'd been in Fiji for a long time, Phil Donaldson, who suggested to me that we just get the band together for a bit of fun. And I'd already been doing some gigs with Damon Davies, doing kind of semi-jug band stuff. So he said, why don't we get a band together and put it together? And we kind of did. But it sort of grew. We actually started recording before we even had the band together, and next thing we knew, people really loved all this stuff again. We couldn't believe it. So that was like a big gap, quite a long time, many years between bands. And at this time, I actually decided to go down the path that I really wanted to do, and Phil was all for that, and everybody else was quite into that too. So and I'd already been working with Jeremy Cook, who's on the kids' albums, and we'd won arias and things like that with that. So he'd already done a junk percussion thing, with garbage bins and sinks and things like that on Play School at one stage. So we decided to make a kit out of all that, and he did that, and we've added since then and just developed the kind of a sound since then. And Phil was particularly interested in doing using the national guitars and things like that. I mean, I'm playing Dave Hubbard's old National tenor guitar, and Phil had a whole collection of National guitars, so we call it the National Junk Band. We haven't got sponsorship yet, though. We're not patriotic, though. Yes, even though it's called the National Junk Band. And that's been a hoot. Yeah, we can't live off it, and I'm too old to be trying to, push bands and all that sort of stuff, really, but it's great fun, and we've done lots of festivals with it, and it's gone down a storm, so we've been really, really pleased with it. And I am at last doing we're writing heaps, and people are responding to the material that we've written, and responding to the vaudeville kind of edge to it all. So it's kind of like a modern day version of Matchbox or whatever. So in a way, it had the kind of similar kind of ideals and things like that. But it's easy to deal with because people are kind of more in harmony with what we're actually doing. With Matchbox, it was really a bunch of students originally just putting together something a bit wacky, but we didn't quite know what.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier it was a direction that you would have liked Captain Matchbox to go. Do you think it may have prolonged the existence of the band had you gone that way?
I think it would have made it a whole lot better. Yeah, I actually think it. Well, it's hard to say. You can't in retrospect, but the thing about it was that I actually was pushing for that kind of direction very early in the piece, and got people kind of felt like it needed more kind of rock influence and things like that, and I felt like that our strength was that we weren't rock. So the junk band has still got kind of a driving. People can dance to it and do, and that's what Matchbox got scared of. It got scared of the fact that you couldn't. People thought they couldn't dance to it, even they could if they tried, but it wasn't a rock beat. So people think that if it's not rock and roll, you can't dance to it. Now, of course, we now all know that all that's complete rubbish, and people are not dancing to rock and roll and dancing to techno dance club. But so it's a funny thing, because really anything that's got some sort of vague beat you can dance to. So we're just not worrying about it now. When no one's precious about whether they're going to be considered as cool or uncool or anything like that. So Matchbox had gone down. It would have been an interesting path for it to go down at the time, because with the coverage and the success that it had, it might have made a real difference to it, but it's hard to say.
2 albums in there with this band. Tell us about the new one.
Well, the new one's coming out sometime in July, we hope. It may be August, depending on how things go. And it's got about 15 tracks on it, so we just can't give it lots of originals, but still also some classic pop songs like Sunny Afternoon from the Kinks, Drive My Car, the Beatles. What are the other ones that people know? All Go Together, which people mightn't know, which is Tom Lehrer. Yep. And Come Up and See Me Sometime, which Mae West kind of did in the old days, but actually we loved. There's a Ukulele Ike. This one of my big heroes is a guy called Cliff Edwards, or Ukulele Ike, who was actually a brilliant singer and performer who ended up dying a terrible death and all that. We won't go on about that. He sang the When You Wish Upon a Star on the Disney theme. He was Jiminy Cricket on and he's fantastic. Anyway, we've done that, so that's got the kind of the covers. I think there's maybe a couple of other ones as well, and then we've done lots of originals as well. A song called Classical Junk, which is kind of a piss take of the whole music scene in one song, or just about. We're also taking a piss take of the country scene called Aussie Country. And we're doing a song called The 21st Century Blues, which is kind of a satire of the kind of modern living. Another song called Forward to the Past, which I actually did do with the Hiccups many years ago, and it was a song that was sort of never saw its day, and it was never recorded, so we dug that one up. And another song called Kitchen Sink Love, which is all about safe sex at the kitchen sink, and a bit of a piss take of gospel music. So lots of different. It's very eclectic, this one, but lots of fun. We've got some great players on it, some great saw playing. That's one of the great joys of doing the junk stuff is I've got onto the saw as well, as we've got the master of saw playing with Azzo Bell, who's an incredible saw player with us as well. And Casbo Johns, who's now playing tuba and jug. She actually plays in the ballet and the opera, and gives up music to play with us. So she's been a real boon to the band too. And Judy Backhouse is another Sydney kind of personality who plays ukulele and accordion and sings beautifully. She's also been they're the kind of been big direction finders for us too. That's been great. So it's been fun. It's a really fun band to work with. I mean, it'll never be, you know, I can't see it, taking over the world or being the next best thing, but it's lots of fun, and we really enjoy it. It's a hoot.
Are you just sticking to Sydney live-wise? Any plan to bring the band down south?
No. The band's already toured. We were down in Victoria for Apollo Bay Festival recently. We did Ipswich up in Queensland, believe it or not.
Wow.
But we've done Perth, and we've done Fremantle. We've done Adelaide. We did Adelaide Festival recently.
Oh, yes.
And didn't do the National Folk this year in Canberra, but we'll hopefully do that next year. And we did Woodford at this last Woodford one. So the band's touring around Australia quite a bit, mainly festivals and the odd kind of other show. Melbourne's a hard one to get into now, even though it's, I still kind of see it as my hometown, but there's not a lot of venues that we're hoping to do. I think it's called, is it the Gershwin Room at the Esplanade?
Yes, yep.
There's a fantasy about doing that with the new album sometime in July.
Oh, that'd be great.
That's the big plan to get in there, and there was a vague possibility of some other venues as well as at Castlemaine. There's a Theatre Royal, and there's something at Dalesford as well, which we were hoping to do when we get the new album up and running.
Terrific. And just to wind up, Mick, having been involved in music, which is primarily a form of good time music, has that helped you maintain an enthusiasm for so long? Is a sense of fun a top priority? I get the feeling it is.
Oh, yeah. Well, if I'm not having fun, I might as well give up, because there's not much money in it. So, it's a great artistic outlet for me. I mean, I make a living out of the solo work that I do, and that's been great, and I thoroughly enjoy that. But the band is a real passion, and the fact that it wasn't a passion when I started with it, but it's sort of grown, to everyone's really into it. So it's fantastic and we're really good friends, and there's none of this kind of the egos or anything like that. Nobody's ego gets too big or anything like that. So it's been really good fun, and that really is what keeps me going. Is if it was just all hard work and nothing else, it is hard work, mind you, but if it was all hard work, though, I wouldn't be doing it.
Okay, Mick, look, thanks for your time. I do appreciate it, especially this ungodly hour.
Oh, pleasure.
Thanks for all the wonderful music. We look forward to the new album in July.
Thanks, John.
And hopefully we'll catch you down here.
Okay.
Good on you, Mick. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.